Students, today our topic is anaerobic respiration. Last time I gave the details about the types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic. Both aerobic and anaerobic respiration you know very well, energy releasing process. But what makes difference is an anaerobic respiration, less amount of energy is produced when compared to the aerobic respiration. That is only due to partial oxidation in case of anaerobic respiration. And also we find the byproducts which are formed in aerobic respiration are different from anaerobic respiration. In anaerobic respiration, at the end commonly ethyl alcohol is produced along with the carbon dioxide. Okay. And also ATP molecules are generated. But how this anaerobic respiration happens? Anaerobic respiration, as I told already, this happens in some of the bacteria and also fungi like yeast, and also in case of animals, in mussels also, skeletal mussels also, this type of anaerobic respiration occurs. But when we see this anaerobic respiration, and organisms prefer these two types, lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation. Some of the bacteria here they involve in lactic acid fermentation, in which lactic acid is formed, whereas in alcoholic fermentation the end product is alcohol. We will discuss about this alcoholic fermentation in the next video lesson. Today we are going to study about the lactic acid fermentation. What type of reaction is lactic acid fermentation? Fermentation means this is a process in which oxygen is not involved. There is no involvement of oxygen here. That point you have to understand. Okay. So in anaerobic respiration, we find that organisms prefer lactic acid fermentation and also alcoholic fermentation. Here in lactic acid fermentation, you see, which is purely the process in which oxygen is not involved. Here there are two steps in lactic acid fermentation. Already I told you lactic acid is the end product here. Some of the bacteria, they carry out this process. In the first step you see here, conversion of glucose to pyruvic acid. This is the first step. And in the second step here, conversion of pyruvic acid to lactic acid. First of all, pyruvic acid is end product formed, and this pyruvic acid is reduced to lactic acid. So these two steps that which are going to be studied under lactic acid fermentation. Okay. So in entire process there is no involvement of oxygen. And what type of reactions are lactic acid fermentation? But one point you have to remember, the fermentation, either lactic acid or alcoholic fermentation, occur in cytoplasm only. But as far as this aerobic respiration concerned, respiration occurs in cytoplasm and another side, that is mitochondria. But here one very important point you have to understand, there is no involvement of mitochondria. I mean in fermentation, both types, Krebs cycle reaction will not happen. Previously I told you in aerobic respiration, Krebs cycle reactions take place. Okay, along with the glycolytic reactions here. But Krebs cycle reactions will not happen in anaerobic respiration. But here one point you have to understand, glycolysis is the first phase of oxidation. So this is common for aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So under anaerobic respiration, lactic acid formation, and also in alcoholic fermentation, the common phase of oxidation is glycolysis here. Okay. And the next phase coming under the fermentation process. This is a fermentation process. This is studied under lactic acid fermentation. Okay. So here glycolytic reactions followed by this fermentation process, but both this type of reactions are enzymatic. I mean enzymes are involved. Without enzymes these reactions will not happen. But one point you have to understand here, glycolytic reactions and fermentation both occur in cytoplasm. That point you have to understand here. So what type of reactions occur in glycolysis? In aerobic respiration, little information I gave you. Detailed information we are going to discuss about glycolysis and Krebs cycle, electron transport in the next video lesson here. So this is overall idea of the lactic acid fermentation. What type of reaction is this? Okay. So here this is the first stage. This is glycolysis. Glycolytic reactions occur in cytoplasm where glucose molecules undergo chemical transformation. Here glucose is what? Substrate molecule. Substrate is nothing but a substance which is undergoing respiration here. Okay, you understand? And this glucose is going to be oxidized to pyruvic acid. At the end of the glycolysis, what is the product formed is pyruvic acid, but pyruvic acid molecule number is 2 here. That point you have to remember. This is enzymatic process and many number of reactions happen with the formation of reaction intermediates like that. Okay, and also in some of the steps energy is released. You know very well, energy is released in the form of ATP here. In the conversion of glucose to this pyruvic acid, the ATP that is released is very little. I told you this process also involving no oxygen here. So here 2 ATP molecules here. Total number of ATP molecules produced in the conversion of glucose to pyruvic acid is 4, of which 2 ATP molecules will be utilized in the beginning of the reaction. So we can get only net gain, that is 2 ATP molecules. Okay, this is little amount of energy only. But one point you have to understand when compared to this glycolysis fermentation process. In fermentation process, you will not find anywhere the ATP molecules. ATP molecules are not generated, energy is not generated in fermentation process. That point you have to understand. Many people will be confused here only. In fermentation process, 2 ATP molecules are generated. Is it correct? The 2 ATP molecules are not generated here. In glycolysis only 2 ATP molecules, that will be the overall lactic acid fermentation. Ultimately, 2 ATP molecules are generated. The 2 ATP molecules are produced only in glycolysis, not in fermentation process. That point you have to remember. No energy is formed in fermentation process. In alcoholic fermentation also there is no formation of ATP. And here we will discuss. In the conversion of the glucose to pyruvic acid here, what represented, this is nothing but oxidation. NADH molecules are produced here. How many number of NADH molecules are produced? 2 molecules of NADH plus H plus. But how this happens? And formation of these 2 NADH molecules happen means, here already you know very well NAD is a coenzyme. The coenzyme on receiving the electrons here gets reduced to NADH, gets converted into NADH molecules here. These electrons are removed in the particular kind of reaction. Those are received by NAD coenzyme, and as a result NADH is formed. Like that 2 NADH molecules are produced. With the release of ATP molecules, overall at the end of the glycolysis we find only 2 ATP molecules. We have to take 2 ATP molecules directly. This is substrate level of phosphorylation. 2 ATP molecules only generated here. Okay, so pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon compound, glucose is a 6-carbon compound. You know very well, you are familiar with that. How many carbons are present in this pyruvic acid? 3-carbon compound. And these pyruvic acid molecules, what are produced here? That point you have to remember. They undergo some of the reactions here. The 2 molecules of pyruvic acid get reduced to 2 molecules of lactic acid. This is our end product. Hello, this is our end product, that is lactic acid, reduced to lactic acid. How this process of reduction happens here? But one point you have to remember, already in glycolysis, NADH molecules, NADH plus H plus molecules are formed. Those are here transferred to this fermentation process, which is going to be happen in cytoplasm here. What happens is, these NADH molecules are involved in the reduction of this pyruvic acid molecule to lactic acid. So in the reduction, NADH molecules are available from glycolytic reactions only. Okay, there is no formation of NADH molecules here. Okay, do you understand? So this pyruvic acid is going to be reduced to 2 lactic acid. Here I gave one formula here. formula, conversion of this pyruvic acid to lactic acid. This is the pyruvic acid is going to be reduced to lactic acid. So this is the process happening. But one point you have to remember, there is no release of ATP here, and also NADH molecules are not produced here. So this is entirely occurs in absence of oxygen. There is no involvement of oxygen here. Common phase is glycolysis here, but Krebs cycle will not happen. Mitochondria is not involved. No mitochondria, no electron transport. No electron transport. Whereas in aerobic respiration, electron transport is very common, in which most of the energy is released. But here, in electron transport is absent because of the absence of the mitochondria. Do you understand? Are you following, students? Okay. Let us study now. But the same process here, what I told you, pyruvic acid, lactic acid reduction happens in animals also. In muscle cells, you see, in our skeletal muscles, what is happening? Let us study here. In skeletal muscles, okay? In our skeletal muscles here, sometimes skeletal muscles, sometimes anaerobic conditions can be created. Anaerobic conditions created. Anaerobic conditions means oxygen is not available to muscles here. When does this happen? When does muscle cells do not receive this oxygen? Actually, oxygen is supplied continuously, but under which conditions oxygen is not available to skeletal muscles? Though how these anaerobic conditions are created? That means here during exercises, during heavy exercises, what happens? The muscle cells will not get adequate amount of oxygen. Under such anaerobic conditions are created here. So in such conditions, what happens is the pyruvic acid is reduced to lactic acid. Pyruvic acid that is formed in the cells, accumulated in the cells. This is reduced to lactic acid here. Okay, now lactic acid accumulation is there in muscle cells. In muscle cells, lactic acid accumulation is there. So it is health hazard. Lactic acid accumulation proves to be harmful. Okay. So after exercise, after taking some time, we get body pains. After taking some rest, whenever we complete the physical exercise, so we take some of the rest now. During that period, we get body pains. These body pains only due to the accumulation of this lactic acid. But how this again we get normal? How this condition will be restored? The condition will be restored whenever oxygen is available. So exercise is stopped here, again oxygen availability will be there. Because of the availability of oxygen, what happens? This lactic acid is going to be broken. Lactic acid is broken down. Whenever lactic acid is broken down, again normal conditions are restored. That point you have to understand. So in animals, in muscle cells, in skeletal muscle cells also, anaerobic conditions created. Oxygen is not available to muscles. So this results accumulation of that lactic acid in muscle cells, and finally what happens? This results somewhat discomfort to the body. So this discomfort is avoided again on the availability of this oxygen. Okay, students, do you understand? So if you like, so thank you for watching my video, and like, share and subscribe please.